While Notre Dame prepares to take on the Georgia Bulldogs in the college football playoff, they continue to be very active in the transfer portal to get ready for next season. 4 players officially committed to the Irish this week, and more are on the way. This is Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Irish, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports, and I hope you had a very Merry Christmas yesterday, and hopefully you still get to enjoy some downtime today on Thursday, December 26th. Quick reminder to hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Today, we are coming at you live from my parents' house down in Sarasota, Florida. Last episode, I was staying at my girlfriend's family home, and everyone in the comments was giving me a hard time for whispering. I thought it was obvious that I was talking in a softer tone because I was in a house that was not my own, and several people were also staying there, so I tried to be cognizant of my surroundings, but apparently that did not come through because the comments were just having a grand old time about my tone. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit louder because of all that, but I also can't promise you that there's not going to be a lot more background noise than normal because this is in my house. I can only control so much. There's a lot of people staying here, and they're all going to be here throughout the time of this episode. You might also hear my dog Murphy barking at some point too. So this is my third straight away game, I guess you could say, as I'm still technically on vacation for the holidays because Luke Smith and I, we did a show in person actually from his family condo the day after Notre Dame beat Indiana, but we're just going to keep the streak alive. It's going to continue until right before New Year's Day when I'm finally back at my apartment in Los Angeles. But Notre Dame is preparing to take on the Georgia Bulldogs in the quarterfinals of the college football playoff, but because the college football calendar is incredibly flawed and honestly pretty stupid, they are also working behind the scenes to add key players for next season via the transfer portal. In the past few days, they officially added 2 new wide receivers in the portal, and then Devontae Smith, the nickel from Alabama, made his commitment official, even though we already knew about it like the week before last. They also added a tight end from an SEC program, and I believe it is the most shocking addition that Notre Dame has ever had in the transfer portal. So we're going to break it all down today, as well as what other moves Notre Dame needs to make in the portal. But let's start with the wideouts, because Notre Dame officially added Virginia wide receiver Malachi Fields and former Wisconsin wide receiver Will Pauling this week. And already, I think this is a more proven group than what they added last cycle in Bo Collins, Chris Mitchell, and Jaden Harrison. Will they produce more at Notre Dame? I mean, I would assume yes, but I also have the benefit of hindsight too, knowing how Bo and Chris and Jaden all did in their one and only season at Notre Dame. But it's not even debatable, really, that the 2 guys they added this cycle are more proven than what Notre Dame added last cycle. Malachi Fields, in my opinion, is the best wide receiver to transfer to Notre Dame to date. He's a better Bo Collins. He announced his commitment on December 23rd, but this has been a done deal for weeks. Like, we've already been talking about it on the show. He was Notre Dame's top target at the position, and they got it done. He is a true boundary wide receiver. He's 6'4", 220 pounds, so he has great size, and he has been incredibly consistent the last 2 years for the Virginia Cavaliers. In 2024, he had 55 receptions, 808 yards, 5 touchdowns. In 2023, he had 58 receptions, 811 yards, and 5 touchdowns again. So if he's able to maintain that same output next season, that would be the best season any Notre Dame wide receiver has had since Chase Claypool back in 2019. And I believe it's because he is going to be the first true wide receiver 1 that Notre Dame has had since Claypool. What I like most about Malachi Fields is that he's a true possession receiver and he can make contested catches. That has been an issue for Notre Dame, not just this season, but really over the past several years. Fields made 10 contested catches this past season and 10 before that as well. So I'm telling you, he's very, very consistent. And Notre Dame doesn't have any more than one player with 5 contested catches this season. So I think Malachi Fields is going to bring a ton to the table. There's a reason why Notre Dame pursued him so heavily early on. In that game, when Notre Dame faced off against Virginia this year, he was the leading receiver for the Cavaliers, 4 receptions, 89 yards. But One of them comes with an asterisk because he did beat Christian Gray on that one play where he caught the ball, and then he clearly dropped it on the way down, but for whatever reason, the refs didn't review it, so they gave him the catch, and he gets to add to the stat sheet, but anyone who's watching that game knows that wasn't really a catch. So that was a great addition. He's very proven. He's done it at the Power 4 level. That is a great piece for the Notre Dame receiving corps next season. But he's not the only piece that Notre Dame is adding to the wide receiver room, because this week they added wide receiver Will Pauling from Wisconsin. He is a perfect fit for Notre Dame and Mike Denbrock's offense, and he's exactly what Mike Brown, the Notre Dame wide receiver coach, looks for in a wide receiver. I know this because Will Pauling played for Mike Brown at Cincinnati and Wisconsin. He had his best season of his career in 2023 when he was playing for Mike Brown, when he's still the wide receivers coach with the Badgers. He had 74 receptions, 837 yards, and 6 touchdowns that year. Now, he did take a bit of a step back this past season in 2024. He only finished with 42 catches, 407 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns. But if you watch Wisconsin this past year, you know they didn't have a great option at quarterback throwing him the ball. So it's not surprising that he took a little bit step back in production, but he's very quick and he's excellent at moving the chains. He's so good at catching the ball on short passes and getting the first down. 42 of his 74 catches went for first downs in 2023. But look, he's not a deep threat. He only averaged 9.7 yards per reception, but I look at him as like a better Jaden Harrison. Harrison might have more breakaway speed, but Will Pauling is a true slot receiver and has already proven that he's capable at the Power 4 level. Not even the Power 4 level, the Big Ten level. So he's going up against really quality competition. He had his best game this season against Alabama, led the Badgers in reception yards that game. And I just think that when Jaden Harrison came over to Notre Dame, there's a bunch of tools that they really liked about him, but he wasn't as proven as a wide receiver. Will Pauling is a different story. He's going to be a better wide receiver option for the Irish next season. But if I had one question about the addition of Pauling, I just think it'd be how he stacks up against Jordan Faison, Jane Greathouse, KK Smith, and Logan Saldate, because Notre Dame has a surplus of slot wide receivers on the roster already, and now you throw Will Pauling in the mix and think, okay, some moves are going to have to be made here. I think Jordan Faison might be more suited to play on the outside and be the full-time replacement for Chris Mitchell. If you remember at the start of the season, Jordan Faison beat out Chris Mitchell, but then he got hurt and he's been fighting with injuries all year long. But then against Indiana, he was the best wide receiver on the field for Notre Dame. So maybe they move Jordan Faison out of the slot permanently, which would then leave room for Jane Greathouse and Will Pauling. Look, before the season, I thought Jane Greathouse was going to have a breakout season and become the true wide receiver 1 option for Notre Dame, but unfortunately, it just hasn't happened that way. Now, that doesn't mean he still can't have a really successful career at Notre Dame, but now that they added Will Pauling, that's another person that's going to compete with Jane Greathouse for snaps. I think that Jane Greathouse is a better deep threat, but who knows what he's going to look like next season after taking a step back this season when he really just burst onto the scene his freshman year. First ever collegiate game, 2 touchdowns against Navy, finished the season with 5 receiving touchdowns, led the team last year, but it's just been a different story for him this year. I still think Jane Greathouse is a very talented player, but he's going to be a battle. He's going to be in a battle next season for playing time. So with these 2 additions, I think Notre Dame is probably done at wide receiver because they're going to lose Bo Collins, they're going to lose Chris Mitchell, and they're going to lose Jane Harrison for sure after the season, and I think they're likely going to lose more. What will Deion Colsey and Jane Thomas do? They're going to be grad transfers next year. They're going to have one more year of eligibility. Will they look elsewhere for more playing time? Maybe. I hope Jane Thomas stays personally because I just think he's an unsung hero on this team. He's excellent as a blocker, and I'm so glad he was able to score a touchdown in that first playoff game for all the work that he does in the run game. But he's probably going to want to be more of a factor in the passing game, either with the Irish next year or maybe it's somewhere else. So maybe one or both of those guys leave, and odds are one or more young guys are probably going to leave because the wide receiver position, that's just kind of what happens. Wide receivers transfer a lot, not just at Notre Dame, but across the board. So you look at guys like a KK Smith, who's kind of getting buried on the depth chart right now. He's also dealing with an injury. Maybe he looks to leave. Maybe Greathouse wants more playing time. I don't know. This is really all speculation at this point, but I think the fact that Notre Dame went out and got Pauling and got Fields suggests that they probably know there might be more moves on the way. If there are more moves, maybe they look to add one more receiver, but I think right now they're pretty solid with Malachi Fields and Will Pauling, and these 2 guys are very talented. They've proven that they can play at this level, and now next year it's just going to be a matter of can they bring that level of production to the Notre Dame offense. Notre Dame has desperately needed more production out of the wide receiver room for a really long time. I think next year will be their best chance at getting over the hump in years. All right, Fields and Pauling weren't the only players that Notre Dame added to improve the passing attack this week. They also added a tight end in the portal, and I believe this is the most surprising addition to the roster in the short history of the transfer portal. Find out why right after this. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. Personally, I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and the spread because I think it's thrilling. But not only can you bet on who will win the game, FanDuel also has bets for which player will score the first touchdown, how many points each team will score, and so much more. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So yesterday, on Christmas Day, Notre Dame got a present, and it was a surprising one at that. Former Arkansas tight end Tai Washington announced his commitment to Notre Dame. And when I saw the news, I was legitimately floored. And it wasn't because of the timing of the announcement. It wasn't because he announced on Christmas Day. I didn't think that was a big deal at all. But on the surface, Notre Dame adding a tight end in the transfer portal isn't super surprising. A couple weeks ago when I did my biggest needs in the transfer portal episode, I said that Notre Dame should look to add a tight end in the portal because when you look at the depth chart, Mitchell Evans is going to be out of eligibility after the season. Cooper Flanagan and Eli Raridon are nice players, but they haven't really taken off quite yet. Certainly not Eli Raridon. That's a player who I've been super, super high on since the moment he got on campus at Notre Dame, but he's had some injury history and to this point, it hasn't really worked out for him, but he still could be tight end 1 next year. Could be him, Cooper Flanagan. Either way, neither one of those guys produced a ton this year in the passing game. They have been good in the run game, but when you look at Notre Dame tight ends historically, you expect a little bit more. And Notre Dame doesn't really take that many tight ends in the transfer portal. Usually they're so good at recruiting tight ends out of high school that they just don't need to. So adding a tight end in itself is new. Then you add in the fact that Washington is an undergraduate. We know that in the past, Notre Dame has had issues taking undergraduate transfers for a bunch of different reasons, but mainly it's because the Notre Dame administration, they wanted transfers to be one from academically like-minded universities as Notre Dame. And they also had to be on pace to graduate like a normal Notre Dame student would be in that situation. But we've also heard in the past that Notre Dame is making some changes to that. They're going to make it a little bit easier for undergraduate transfers to get into Notre Dame. This would be proof of that because Washington is an undergrad. But not only is he an undergrad, he's an SEC undergrad. Notre Dame doesn't get many transfers from the SEC at all. When I went back and looked at it, Mitch Jeter is the only player to transfer from an SEC school to Notre Dame, but he's a kicker and he was a graduate transfer. So this is truly a one-of-a-kind transfer. But the real icing on the cake of all this surprising stuff when it comes to Tai Washington is that Sam Pittman, the Arkansas head coach, kicked Tai Washington off the team this season for a violation of team rules. Pittman made the announcement on October 28th of this year, and then later on, Washington explained his side of the story on the 4th and 5 podcast with former Arkansas tight end DJ Williams because Pittman did not go into details at all, really, when he said that Washington was no longer on the team, just said that it was not a suspension. They were not on the roster. But in short, Washington said that he was dealing with mental health issues really all season long, and at one point, he was asked to go into the game against Mississippi State, and Washington said no. He said that Arkansas had a big lead, and he wasn't in the right mental state to go in the game, and he did not want to hurt the team. That's really all the information we have at this point. You can take that for what it's worth. I think it's interesting that that happened, especially when Devondre Campbell, the linebacker for the San Francisco 49ers, refused to go into the game when the 49ers were playing against the Rams, and that became a huge story in the sports world. So I don't know all the details here, but it is somewhat similar compared to that situation. So in summary, an undergraduate tight end transfer from the SEC who was just kicked off his team is now transferring to Notre Dame. Saying one of those things out loud makes it unlikely, and then you say it all together and it feels impossible. But times are changing. It might be fair to ask, why would Notre Dame go through with this? Because Washington didn't really produce a ton when he was at Arkansas. He was redshirted his freshman year, and then for his career, he finished with 14 receptions, 212 receiving yards, and 4 touchdowns. He actually did score a touchdown his freshman year. He had 1 catch, 17-yard touchdown the year that he was redshirted. So he basically only played 1.5 years, I guess you could say, when he was with the Razorbacks, but he has great size. He's 6'4", 247 pounds, and clearly Notre Dame sees a lot of potential in him, or else they wouldn't have gone through with this. He was not really a top recruit coming out of high school. He's a 3-star, the 32nd ranked tight end in the country in the class of 2022. But it is my understanding that Notre Dame offensive coordinator and tight end coach Mike Denbrock is very familiar with Tai Washington. That helps. I think he recruited Washington when Denbrock was still at Cincinnati. But considering he has 2 years of eligibility left, I think this is more about 2026 than it is about 2025. Some people think that Washington can be tight end 1 as early as next year. Personally, I don't see that happening at all. I think Cooper Flanagan and Eli Raridon are going to take the next step next year when they are going to be the main guys. They're going to be given all the chance in the world to take over like a true tight end 1 spot and become the next great Notre Dame tight end. And they have flashed their potential a lot in the past. We've seen it at different moments. We also know that they're very good in the blocking game as well. Cooper Flanagan had a nice pancake that was making the rounds on social media against Indiana this past weekend. So I have more confidence in Cooper Flanagan and Eli Raridon than I do with Tai Washington because they've just proved it more at the college level. Now, is there a world where Tai Washington blows all the expectations out of the water and ends up really being comfortable at Notre Dame and taking off in the Mike Denbrock offense? Maybe. But it feels more like a projection for the following season when some of those guys might leave. And Notre Dame did try to recruit a second tight end in this recruiting class. So you know that they wanted to add more pieces to that room for the long term. And then given the fact that Washington is an undergrad, it makes more sense. Look, the fact that he was kicked off the team is a red flag. There's different ways you can spin it. I'm sure that Notre Dame did a ton of due diligence to make sure that that situation was maybe not as bad as it seemed, or that he's in a much better mental state now going into Notre Dame. But I just don't understand how you can say with certainty that he's going to be great at Notre Dame, because maybe he'll work out, maybe he won't. I'm not saying that he won't. I'm just saying I don't really know what he's going to do when he's at Notre Dame. What I do know is the fact that Notre Dame was able to get a player like him on the roster is a very good sign. Because like I said, we have heard that they made changes to accept more undergraduate transfers. This is proof of that. We've heard they were willing to take transfers from schools that don't prioritize academics as much as Notre Dame does, and that's proof as well. They don't get a lot of transfers who are undergraduates. They certainly don't get a lot of graduate transfers or get a lot of transfers from the SEC. They accomplished both of those things in this transfer. And I think that's the story here. Notre Dame has changed some of its protocols to allow more players to transfer in, and that is an important and necessary step for this team to be successful in the future. And if Washington works out, great. And if he doesn't, this is a low-risk move anyway. But long-term, I think this is a great sign for the Irish. All right, if you're keeping track, that's 3 new additions for the Irish via the transfer portal this week, plus Devontae Smith made his commitment official. So, are any more on the way? That's coming up next. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. There really is nothing quite like the hype and atmosphere of being at a live sporting event, and Gametime is a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for all your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I recently used Gametime to go to a Lakers game, had an awesome time. Plus, Gametime is the perfect place to buy tickets for your friends and family as the priceless gift during the holiday season. My favorite thing about the app is you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, and then you can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Plus, the all-in pricing shows your total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. What time is it? Game time. So what's next for Notre Dame in the transfer portal? Because I think they're done at wide receiver. They've already had 2 guys there. They're finished getting their nickel back. They got Devontae Smith from Alabama. I think they're done at tight end as well because they got Tai Washington. Defensive tackle remains the top priority for this team. This transfer portal class is going to be really dependent on what they're able to get at the defensive tackle position, because that is by far the biggest need on this roster right now. And if they aren't able to land some quality talent at that position, it really doesn't matter what else they added because that is going to be a giant question mark going into next season. This has been the biggest need. It remains the biggest need. And we're going to get a glimpse of life without Riley Mills when Notre Dame takes on Georgia because he's going to be out for the remainder of the college football playoff. Howard Cross is going to be playing in that game, but he's not going to be on the team next year because he is going to be out of eligibility. So we're going to get a taste of what that looks like. Beyond defensive tackle, and like I said, I think they need 2, maybe even 3 guys, 2 definitive starters, then 1 depth piece, because I also don't think Jason Onye is going to be on the team anytime soon. That leads us to quarterback, because there is enough smoke out there to suggest that Notre Dame is in the market for a starting quarterback once again. I know a lot of fans don't want to hear that, but when there is this much smoke, there's usually fire. But on the other hand, Marcus Freeman has said publicly, multiple times now, that they're not in the market for a transfer quarterback. So it's really hard to tell what's true and what's not. But here's what we do know. CJ Carr is the projected starter for next season by all accounts. He has not thrown extensively for 3 months because he suffered an elbow injury in practice the week leading up to the game against Louisville at the end of September. The media was just at practice this week. CJ Carr was barely practicing. He was barely throwing the ball. He'd warm up with Gino Gadoli, and that was that for him. He was not really a participant in practice. That is a big deal. I know some people try to dismiss it. The fact that he's gone 3 months without valuable reps during his freshman season is a big deal. He can't even take scout team reps. And I know that he wouldn't have been really practicing with the 1s or the 2s, even if he was healthy. Still, you don't want a player who's developmental to not get any reps for the bulk of the regular season. So that's a big problem, and that could impact how he plays next season. Also, he's a freshman. He needs all the reps he can get at this level because you look at all the quarterbacks around college football, it's very rare for a freshman quarterback or a redshirt freshman quarterback to really just light it up right away. They got to get all the mistakes out. They got to get acclimated to the speed of the college game and all that stuff. So CJ Carr's short-term future is a little bit up in the air right now as he recovers from that injury. We also know that Steve Angeli and Kenny Minchie are both on the roster now, but the fact that Notre Dame was willing to get a transfer portal quarterback 2 years in a row suggests that they aren't really that high on Steve Angeli. Personally, I don't know why Kenny Minchie isn't talked about more because when we saw him in the blue gold game, he was excellent both as a runner and a passer. I think he throws a beautiful spiral. He's got a bunch of raw talent, but you just don't really hear that much about Kenny Minchie. Again, I don't know why. I'm high on him as a player. I was high on him as a recruit. I think he's accurate, and I think he's exciting. But again, these coaches are with these players every single day in practice. They're with them on the practice field, in meeting rooms. They know these guys way more than you or I do. So if they don't think that Angeli or Kenny Minchie have what it takes to be a great quarterback at Notre Dame, then I'm inclined to believe him because there's really no doubt in my mind that Steve Angeli could go out there for Notre Dame and win like 8 to 9 games. I think if he came in against Northern Illinois this season, they probably win that game if he comes in the second half to relieve Riley Leonard, who is clearly hurt. But it's not about winning 8 to 9 games. Notre Dame's trying to make the playoff and make a splash in the college football playoff every single year, and clearly they don't think Steve Angeli or Kenny Minchie are going to be capable of doing that next season for the Irish. And CJ Carr, given his injury, he might not be ready either. So I think they're going to be looking for a quarterback. If they don't get one, it wouldn't shock me, but if they do get one, it wouldn't be a surprise either, even though Marcus Freeman has said publicly multiple times that he doesn't anticipate Notre Dame will add one in the transfer portal. We're going to have to wait and see on that end. But going back to the defense, I also think they need to add a defensive end for next season as well. Because even though they have 6 quality guys right now, when you look at both end positions, and Jordan Botelho, Boubacar Traore, both of those guys are coming back next year. We assume Junior Tuialamaka is going to be on the team next year as well. Logan Thomas is emerging. Like, those are 4 really quality options at Viper, but Jordan Botelho suffered a very serious injury to his knee. We don't know when he's going to be ready for next season. He's definitely going to miss the spring. He's definitely going to be missing camp next year as well. And we saw Mitchell Evans, who is coming back from a major knee surgery that he suffered during the season, take a while before he could really ramp things up. The same logic applies to Boubacar Traore. So when are those guys going to be ready next season? It remains to be seen. Bryce Young is thriving. He is going to be an excellent player at Notre Dame, and I think he's going to be a big-time contributor for the Irish next season, as well as Josh Burnham, who has had a really good year this year when he's been healthy. But when you really break it down, that's 4 guys who you know will be ready to go at the start of next season, and 2 question marks in Jordan Botelho and Boubacar Traore. In a perfect world, Patel and Traore would be able to fully recover from their injuries before the start of next season, but that ain't happening. So I think you should try to go out and get another edge rusher in the portal, but it might be hard to sell it to them because they're going to know that at some point during the season, Patel and Traore are going to be back, and those are two really good players. Still, I think Notre Dame should look to add a defensive end, and they're going to look to add another kicker. This is just the way of life right now in the transfer portal era. Notre Dame is going to go out there and try to get a veteran, proven kicker to add to the roster. They did add Eric Schmidt, the kicker, in this last recruiting class, but do you really want to trot out a true freshman in a big game next year as a kicker? I don't really see that happening. So I think they're going to get one here soon. I also think that they're going to add a safety as well. Devontae Smith fills the hole at nickel, but not necessarily safety, even though he could play the position a little bit. I just think there's too many unknowns at the position other than Adon Schuler. They lose Xavier Watts after this season, and I like Luke Talich. I like Kennedy Urlacher, but I don't know if they're going to be ready to be full-time starters next season. Beyond that, there's not a ton of depth right now at the position, so I think they're going to look to add a starting safety as well. But it's important to know the transfer portal window closes in 2 days, except for teams in the college football playoff. Teams who are in the college football playoff, once their season ends, they were allowed 5 additional days for those players on that roster to enter the transfer portal. So I'm sure that when Notre Dame season, whenever that ends, there are going to be some guys who leave, but they're making moves behind the scenes, and this has been made clear, the fact that they were already able to add these guys while they prepare for the college football playoff. Going into this cycle, I didn't think we'd hear all that much while Notre Dame was still playing, but the longer they play, the more these guys have to make an announcement at some point. So I guess we shouldn't be too surprised, but I'm not going to be surprised when more guys in the coming days announce their commitments to Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame is going to work quickly and efficiently to get these guys on board and on the roster so that they're ready to go for the spring. But as we get more news and updates, make sure to come to Locked On Irish. We're going to have all the latest on that, plus the game against Georgia coming up here in a couple of days. That's going to do it for this episode, though. Tomorrow, we're going to be back to the college football playoff and do a deep dive into Notre Dame's matchup with the Georgia Bulldogs. Remember to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast. Obviously, with me being on the road every single day up until, I think, December 30th. The schedule has been a little bit out of whack. Christmas messed all that up too, but still doing episodes, and the best way to stay up to date is to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast. And also, if you enjoyed the show today, please give this video a like if you're watching along on YouTube, or rate the podcast 5 stars and leave a review. Thanks for joining me, guys. I'll see you tomorrow.